watched my videos on the CMDB and got a manager level job off the street, not knowing anything, but just watching my videos and, blew enough smoke in the interview that he knew what he was doing to get the manager level job.
Welcome to the first series of the Off Menu IT podcast. I'm your host, Sean Ashbury, and in this episode, we are focused on service management leadership's ITSM and ITAM solution, as well as multiple thought leadership and training services that he provides. The episode is one of 9 of episodes that you can enjoy this season. This episode was recorded on November 7th, and some of the proposed announcements may have already been released. This podcast is fully independent and does not accept payments from its guests. The mission is to help the ITAM community make better decisions through their own discovery. Let this maximize your IT budgets and improve your RFP process. In this episode, we have Jeffrey Tefertiller, who is the founder of Service Management Leadership. Enjoy. All right, so here we have Jeffrey Tefertiller of Service Management Leadership. He's an author, a podcaster, a YouTuber, a trainer, a leading thought leader, and service provider with over 20 years in the ITSM and asset management industry. His last full-time employment was within KPMG as a director, where he led all the internal internal asset management and 75% of the service management team. 4 years ago, he decided to leave that all behind to become independent, to help organizations improve their asset management and service management capabilities. And also throughout his career, he's successfully managed to navigate 2 children to university, with the latest just starting his first year. So a busy 20 years, Jeffrey.
Really busy. And I would have it no other way, right? Like, I don't know what to do with my spare time. And so I thank you for joining me, having me on and letting me join your podcast. And I'm ready to get started. This is exciting.
Pleasure. Brilliant. So, well, exactly that. So let's get started. So who is Jeffrey Tefertiller, and what is the service management leadership all about?
Well, that's a great question because it depends on the audience, right? And I'm personally, I have a wife, 2 kids. I enjoy American football. I have 2 kids in university. I read a lot, all that sort of thing. I don't watch movies. I really don't watch regular TV. I'm usually working on something or reading, just trying to grow. And I'm at a stage in life where I really try to grow in some area all the time. Professionally, since I left KPMG in January of 2020, and I always kind of chuckled because it was right before the pandemic. Us guys sometimes are full of hubris and like, I want to go out on my own. Oh, I think I can do this. And that was right before the pandemic. And since then, I really focused on 3 things. And the first is helping organizations get more out of their ITSM tooling, mainly ServiceNow. They've implemented it, whether it's service management, asset management, they're not getting all the value that they expect. And so doing that reconciliation from the tool and how people work. The second is helping organizations go through big transformations like operating models, all of that people aspect. And the third is helping organizations solve industry specific problems. Like there was a bank that had audit deficiency and they needed help with business continuity, disaster recovery, all that sort of stuff. Where you have all this regulatory and you have to solve it. And so that's kind of what I do. And it's kind of, people are like, you don't do just one thing. And I'm like, I don't know if I could do just one thing. My brain is going all the time and people are like, you're so excitable. And I'm like, I'm passionate all the time. You and I, Sean, have talked a few times, and I think my excitement or passion is evident every time, and this is just who I am, and I'm always jazzed up and ready to talk. Let me conclude that question with this. I think our society, and I don't know if it's our industry driven by society or just the way our industry is, we have not enough. We have very few conversations on just talking shop, just how to get better. How do we help others? So I really appreciate your initiative because everything we hear now is sponsored by a tool or this or that. There aren't enough conversations about talking shop and how do we elevate because people work remotely. There's just not as much conversation as there used to be. So I really applaud your efforts with the podcast.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's somewhat inspired by you and several other of the thought leaders out there who willingly put their information, their knowledge out there. So, hey, it's every idea is spawned from something, and definitely a part of it was from yourself. Now, you mentioned there, obviously, there's many parts to the service management leadership, and I guess good question here is what drew you to the ITAM piece, and I guess what drew you to the ITSM piece, and how does it align? I mean, it clearly does. So why and how?
So that is a great question, and people always chuckle at this story. 1994, a long time ago. Some of your listeners may not have even been born then, right? And I went into business with my twin brother. Yes, there's two of me, even though we're opposite. And we were doing asset management as a managed service. And so back then, asset management was hardware. We didn't care about, you think mid-90s, nobody cared about software. It was a $5,000 laptop and banking equipment. It was all this expensive stuff. And we helped organizations with their life cycle management, all that sort of thing. And then as we grew, we had a service desk and all of that. And we're like, what are best practices on managing these tickets? And so my worlds collided there in those 16 years being self-employed with them. And then when I went into the corporate side, I started doing both because I had experience in both. And, and it's kind of drawn me into them being together. What's interesting is a decade ago, we thought of them as separate entities. And I think today, because of the tooling, and I mean in this very specifically, the tooling, for the most part, is very bring them together centric. Think ServiceNow, think BMC, all of them, they have both modules in the same tool. That has now caused organizations to group those two groups together. And so for me, it's been a pleasure and it's been great having them together. So I don't, I'm not trying to solve two problems, but it's one of those that the tooling has dictated those two being together.
That was the moment that you realized the valuable offering from your ITSM and the ITAM background. And I guess, obviously, ServiceNow has been the main name of late, but was there an original tool that kind of hit the market and effectively created these issues because everyone was implementing them without the due knowledge?
That's a great question. You made me think there because that issue is only, or that, predicament has only come up. It's only arisen in the last decade because before that, there were good tools. You think of the BMC remedies, you think of the CAs going back even further, the HP tools going back even further. Those were good tools, but they didn't really have an asset management component because software asset management wasn't a big deal. It's only in the last few years that we were like, we're spending tens of millions of dollars on software. We need to figure out how to manage this. And now it's cloud and containers and all that fun stuff. But the tooling, in my opinion, has brought those together because when you think of like discovery, the same discovery on that tool discovers assets and configuration.
There are so many facets to you. Author, as mentioned, podcaster. I'm sure people have listened to that. YouTuber, and obviously the services that you provide. But what is the kind of the core service that you're focusing on, or rather that you have focused on in the recent past?
That is a good question. So all of the content I put out is just to help others. I started the YouTube channel when I was looking to grow my knowledge. And I'm like, there's not very much out there. So I read a lot, and then started sharing my knowledge. And then on the podcast, it's just sharing my knowledge, writing books, sharing my knowledge. They're not for, nobody gets rich. Nobody makes money off of any of that. They just do it to share. The main thing I do now is just leading through change. Whether it's we put in service now and we don't know what to do, we need value, leading through change, try and bring that together, creating new operating models, helping organizations define their services or products, and all the people aspects. Because I think of myself as, well, I like the technology. I love technology. I think of myself as more of a people leader, helping people get through difficult times. And, dealing with people from when you're in technology is not as easy as people think it is, right? You know what I mean? Like the people aspects, when you're dealing with technology people, that's not very easy. And so that's the area that I really thrive in, helping people get through change. And if you want a couple stories, you may like these stories. There is a large, I won't mention name, large services company that called me, and they had 300,000 laptops. Big company. They knew where 47% of them were, right? So it's over 150,000. So they don't, we think of the value of the laptop. Yes. We think of the software that resides on that laptop that they're paying for. Yes. We're thinking of the risk that they're dealing with. Yes. Like those are big problems to solve. And that's what I enjoy. Another project I helped with a large U.S. government agency, and they would have somebody, hopefully people are entertained by these stories. They would have somebody call the service desk and say, I need this asset moved from place A to B. And then somebody else would call, I need this other asset moved from D to E, and then this happened over 10 years. They never updated their asset register. And so when we called in, nobody knew where anything was, and it's that sort of thing because you're dealing with people and you're trying to figure out not only fixing things, but how do we fix it going forward? And the last story I'll tell you, it has to do more change management, is I was asked by a large health insurance company. They were doing change management, the ITIL change management, not the organizational change management, outside of their ServiceNow tool. And so my job was trying to okay, let's move that in and try to help people adopt it along the way, because nobody likes somebody else telling them you need to do your job differently. Nobody likes that, right? And so part of what I do and I like doing is helping people through that change, which is a difficult time. Kid gloves is the US term. Like, how do we help people through that change in a soft way, but firm way, And so that's, hopefully you're entertained by those stories.
And I guess as far as kind of the outrageous 47% of the 300,000, was that a moment when you kind of realized, hey, if a company like this can have that issue, and also the second story when just no one was in charge of any movement of hardware, was that when you kind of realized, oh, you know what, well, there is a business here, and I do have a lot of value to provide?
Very much so. And a funny story about my YouTube channel, and people always love stories. There is a gentleman, I won't say his name. He watched my videos on the CMDB and got a manager level job off the street, not knowing anything, but just watching my videos, and, blew enough smoke in the interview that he knew what he was doing to get the manager level job. And which always, I don't know whether to be happy or sad about that, Sean. Like, sad because I helped purvey this, or happy because, somebody put on value. But, it's one of those things that I talk application. A lot of people talk theory. I talk about, like, we solve X in this way. And that's one of the things where my content, I really try to, like today, people are talking about AI, and especially with asset management, all that. I noticed there was a recent situation in Great Britain where some AI initiatives got got canceled because there wasn't a good business case. And, there's a lot of this stuff that we just have to look at a very tactical and application way. And AI is one of them. Asset management's one of them. And anyway, I could talk for hours on this stuff.
As we did touch on AI, as far as your specifics of the YouTube channel, the thought leadership that you provide, do you see AI kind of integrating into what you specifically provide? How is that kind of happening right now? Or have you not quite figured out? Because I appreciate that is a loaded question in terms of the here and now, because no one's quite figured it out yet. Do you have any idea?
I've seen it used and used it for training myself. Like there are AI avatars that you can, great companies, and I don't like ChatGPT is the low hanging fruit in this conversation. I want to run past that and let's talk about real use cases. And so for training, there are companies out there where you can upload a script and it has an AI avatar do your training for you. That's kind of cool, right? Yeah, I mean, do they mispronounce Tefertiller? Yes, but I might have to put a few e's in there to make it a long RD. But there's that. But I wrote a book earlier this year, earlier in 2024, on service delivery, and what I called AI and machine learning, I called them enablers. You have your people and your process and your partners and your technology. Enablers like AI help those do better. AI, I don't think will replace people or tools or processes. It'll just help them do better. Like there's a use case in the service management world where AI is looking through changes and it's saying, hey, this, when you have this specific type of change, sometimes they fail. And it gives you a percentage of 92% chance of success for this type of change. That's a great use case because it looks at all the incidents. You can apply that same logic to, especially when it's tied with machine learning, to asset management. Hey, I don't think we have all of our assets. We have more people in our ERP system than we have assets. You need to go look at this. There's certain use cases that really make a lot of sense. Now, the ones that don't are the ones that are like, wouldn't it be cool if, like people aren't going to fund that in today's economy. They're going to fund, hey, I think we can do more with less if we use AI or machine learning in this way.
When you said enablement there, I mean, obviously you enabled someone to get a job off the back of your YouTube, which you've curated over there since I think it's 2016, isn't it?
So yeah, 2016, 2017. I have 1,500 videos out there of my ugly mullet, my scraggly voice talking about this stuff.
You're probably going to put me out of a job by enabling people to get jobs through it. Or actually, skills. Skills are always the issues. But ServiceNow, you mentioned it at the start of the podcast in terms of a lot of the world has implemented ServiceNow, and there are issues with the skills. I mean, do you see that as a major challenge? And I guess, we kind of already touched on it, but how are you providing a solution for it?
So that's a great question. Just like there are a lot of recruiters out there aren't very many great recruiters. There are a lot of developers. There are a lot of architects. There are a lot of things in the ServiceNow space. There aren't a lot of great, and there's even fewer people who are great leaders in the space that know the technology and know that this is how this is supposed to happen, and then lead it through. You can't replace the human brain in that regard. Just like you can't, in a recruitment aspect, you can't replace the human brain to say, I know they have this certification, but it doesn't look like they have the whole package. My gut tells me I've seen this before. This kind of profile is not what the client wants. I mean? Like there's something about that when you talk to your client, you have a feel in your gut that what that's supposed to look like. And that's where I like to add value on the ServiceNow and on the other piece. I've seen this before. I know how to be successful. Unless you take it out of my brain and put it in somebody else's, you're not going to be able to replicate that. And I always think that we as a society, and I'm speaking globally, we do not appreciate greatness enough. Like, think about your best footballers in the UK. right? There's a big drop off between the great ones and the pretty good ones. I mean, there's a big drop off and it's noticeable. But if you look at the pay, there's some that are pretty good that get paid like they're great and they're not great. And it's because our society does not know how to differentiate greatness from they're pretty good. And I think that's where AI will not be able to help as well, because there are, like I said, it's people, and leading people through this is the people aspect. And it's hard to replicate that human ability.
With service management leadership, the training, the knowledge that you have, and the services and the successful services that you provided in the past around service now. I mean, I'm sure you have some stories in terms of how you've gone in and seen an absolute rubbish,
Yeah.
and then fixed it. So, I mean, how are you yourself fixing the service now issue?
Here's a story from my KPMG days. So I get hired, and they put two jobs into one for me, and they hired another person. So I had this big group, like biggest group, and they were on their sixth try of the CMDB, the sixth. And so I inherited the same team that had tried the first five. I inherited the same stakeholders of the first five. I inherited everything. Not to make it even worse, the project was already a month behind. And they're like, here you go. And so just by knowing what to do and how to look at scope and how should we measure, I was able to get it, and it never been above like a 55% accuracy. We got it to 83% in 6 months and got even further. But it's the knowing how, like expertise is a big thing. And so I always go back to that one because it's a big rock for me, in my career. It's just like I live in a place in the US that's not very populated compared to others. Most of my KPMG counterparts were in New Jersey, very populated, very cultured. And, here I am coming in as a big, ugly guy in there. And I walk in, and because I'm 6'5", and most of the people up there were like 5'6", 5'7", so I'm like a foot taller. And I had this esteem of these people are KPMG, these people they know what they're doing. And I walked in and I didn't realize that, there were people in those groups that used my stuff, which was kind of flattering, but at the same time that I knew more than others, right? Like, this is KPMG. I didn't realize that I would be the one walking in off the street that would know the most. And so it was like a light bulb moment in my first, few weeks on the job that, hey, we're going to be okay, and that's what built my confidence to go out on my own. It's like, hey, we have this okay. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, something that's going through my head when you mentioned a 6 foot plus with a load of kind of mid 5 foot. It's just a Gandalf's wizardry when you kind of go in there and say, going into the Shire and say it's all going to be okay. If you're enjoying listening to this episode, please show your support and take this short break to like and subscribe to this series and beyond. One more thing, if you know someone who could benefit from this episode, share the love and share this episode. Thank you. From a perspective of a company like the size of KPMG, obviously internally huge, having gone through the process 6 times, is that 60% utilization of service now common in the market?
That their mistakes were very common. And I'll tell you two things that are big mistakes, and it has to do with any tool. It's not just ServiceNow. One is taking an IT centric view. So like the big key of CMDB and all that other stuff is, what do your stakeholders need and want? Because usually and it bleeds over to asset as well. But if you're keeping track of more things than your stakeholders want or need, it costs you resources. If you have one thing that's really important and 4 things that are not important, and you treat them all equally, the one thing that's really important will not be done well. I mean, it's just the way it is. And so understanding that it's an outside in view of service management and asset management. What do our stakeholders need? and really be hyper focused on what do they need? How do I help deliver it? That's the
Mhm.
first and foremost.
Mhm.
And the second part is most of the time the tool has been misimplemented. I don't want to really get into that because I'll cause enemies. And I'm a friendly guy. I don't like causing enemies. But it's been misimplemented,
Mhm.
and there are people internally that don't
Mhm.
want to adapt to how it should
Mhm.
be. So you
Yep.
have this big divide, this chasm,
Mhm.
where the tool's not being used right and it wasn't implemented the way it
Mhm.
could be, should be, would be.
Mhm.
And so there's this chasm that needs to be reconciled.
Yep. Yep. Two great takeaways there, but I mean, I guess the second takeaway is certainly from a perspective of, I mean, when you need someone with your knowledge, with your guidance, to be able to get, just to kind of go back to the KPMG, to the 60% to the 83% of 6 months, following the processes that you've obtained over the 20 years. And just to, I mean, you've got your low hanging fruit. You've also then got your medium to long term implementations, the processes that you can install. So the knowledge is there, but you definitely need someone to guide you through it. Hey.
And the guide, that's a great way because earlier this year, my family went whitewater rafting and through the Royal Gorge. If you ever seen it, it's been in James Bond movies. It's a river and they're like class 5 rapids. So it's like the highest class. And
Tasty.
we went in May where it's rocking and rolling. I mean, the water is rocking and rolling because it's usually melted snow that's really cold. And the last time my wife and I went, it was before we had kids. So, I had 2 university age, so it's been a long time. We got bounced out, and she's like, never again. So this time, I've had to wait till the kids were old enough, right? And it's serious. Like we had life jackets, we had helmets. I mean, it's like serious business. And I tell them, I want the best guy. My wife is skittish. We need the best guy. Everybody else, you go through with a series of boats and guides. All the other boats, they give us this guy who's 50 years old, dreadlocks, missing teeth, like he's done this before. And and he knew exactly how to navigate that raft through the rapid at the right speed and the right angle, while some of the junior guides in the other boats that were along with us, they did. And that's part of that guide aspect, even on the recruiting side to say, "Oh, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client,
Mhm.
I know you're asking for X, but I really think that we need to modify that to Y because what you're really asking for, you're not going to get the candidate you're wanting." Like there's something that experience and expertise brings to the table that people just underappreciate today. And hopefully I'm saying that right, just to guide the way.
I wish I personally had an example of going down to the local rapids, so I could also say that analogy from a personal perspective. Because no, that's yeah, totally true. He's obviously lost a lot of teeth along the way and learned the hard way to know exactly where to navigate. Similarly, a business recruiting the wrong person will lose teeth in terms of financial, okay, but also time spent trying to use the wrong recruiter, finding that. Again, that guy's probably lost a couple of teeth already trying to find the right person if he's a ServiceNow recruiter.
Exactly.
But
It's the same thing as
agreed.
my KPMG CMDB story, right? Like you need somebody that knows what they're doing. And I think it applies to all, and that's why I said it's recruiting. It applies to everything is those people that know what they're doing and that are experts and have that expertise and they under they have the scars to prove it, like, hey, Mr. Client in the recruiting. I've had somebody ask for this and they got everything looked right, but they got the wrong person, the wrong profile. I really advise that you do X. That guide personality is what's missing because a lot of times our hubris says, I have all this expertise. I want to hold it tight. I want to keep it in. But as a guide, our mentality is how do we help others along their journey so they make great decisions?
Well, I say it takes time, and I guess with takes time to learn that knowledge. And I guess with yourself, how are you unique in the market? And it's, I mean, we've just touched on that for the last 5-10, but it is true. The expertise you have, the passion you have. I'm going to answer this for you. The expertise you have, the passion you have. Um, that's what makes, in my opinion, yourself unique because there's very few that even try to entertain the idea of putting their knowledge out there in such a way that you do. And so, as you mentioned, it's the expertise. You can go with someone who has the same title and the understanding, but do they really? Because they probably listened to your podcast and gone on your YouTube channel and were able to highlight. No, I'm sure. Not everyone, obviously, Jeffrey.
Well, I think the other part that is a little different for me is I love people. You can tell I get engaged in these conversations, right? And helping people through that process of change is difficult. There's in American football, there's a former general manager who now writes for Sports Illustrated named Andrew Brandt. And he told me, he said something that, when somebody says something and you don't agree with it all the way, but it plants a seed. He said, when you go into, now he teaches sports law topics, but when you go into a new organization, there are three types of groups. There are the groups that love you and they want new change. They're early adopters. And then there are the people who maybe are on the fence. And then there are the people who are against any new change. And he said, a lot of people go after the ones that are the anti-group. And he said, don't go after that middle group, because once you have roughly, whatever that equivalent is, 2/3, that anti-group looks even more further out. And don't waste your time on the people that may never change. It'll sort out.
Also, the ripple effect too. If you get the majority, then the rest might come. Is there a revolutionary aspect to the way that you're trying to present your knowledge and to provide your service at service management leadership?
That's a good question. I'll tell you why I think I am revolutionary in a different way. Because I know the technology, but I don't get buried in the technology. Like when I was at KPMG, I worked for the CTO, and it would always bother me. He was in ServiceNow looking at things. Like, if you delegate it, you stay out of it. And so, I love the technology. We talked about AI. We've talked about a lot of technology. I love technology, but it's the people that determine your success. When you're bringing people through these changes, the ability to work with all types of people, the ones that love you, the ones that may not love you, the ability to work with them and help them through this time of difficulty, because their job is being uprooted as well, right? And that is what I think I do differently and communicate differently than most, because I'm not a technologist that came through the ranks, like, hey, this developer, and now you're the head developer, and now you're the CTO. That's not me. Mine is more of a business perspective. And how do we create business outcomes using this technology so people get what they want and help people through that process? Because your stakeholders are people, your customers are people, your employees are people, your outsourced partners are people. And what's different is the ability to work with people. And that is not as strong in the technology world.
Yes, well, I guess going back to the ITAM, ITSM connection, is that you ITSM people are very people focused, process focused. So you understand that it's trying to drive everyone and making sure people follow processes. So I guess that's also kind of part of it. You're thinking, you don't get stuck in the licensing, the analytics of where's this going, or the hardware kind of where. Well, you do actually, because you save people. You figured out where it was going and where it all was. But you get my point.
Yeah, but let's look at that. If you're a salesman or saleswoman, you're executing processes as well, right? I mean, if you look at ITAM, let's say you found software licensing opportunities, you still have to go deal with the technology teams, and you have to go through and you got told, hey, we need to deploy less or buy more. Those are still difficult people conversations that not everyone is equipped to have and to do in a way that will not make enemies. And so, my whole thing is, how do we help people through that? And I would say, especially SAM, software asset management, may have more processes than anything else, because you have vendor onboarding, your tool onboarding, your day-to-day maintenance, your disposal, your decommission. I mean, you have a lot of even license harvesting, a lot of processes to understand and make sure you're dealing with people.
In your opinion, I mean, we've already touched on service now as an issue, but what is the biggest challenge that we find today in the ITSM ITAM market?
That is a great question. And I want to say that it's because both of those, ITSM and ITAM, start with IT. Neither take an enterprise view. And so if you look at ITAM, for example, as an IT problem, you'll fail because let's take a hospital. A hospital has so much technology that's not IT. You go into a room and it has all these technology with barcodes on it, which makes me think asset management, right? You have all this technology, in the divide between IT and the rest of the company or business or university. It's all morphed into one now because you cannot produce products and services without technology nowadays. There's no way. Even plumber uses technology, right? How do they send me bills? And so it's how do we take that enterprise view of service management and asset management, and because those stakeholders must be enterprise, right? Like everything must be enterprise if we're doing that, not IT centric.
That's one of the things, of course, that you've highlighted throughout, looking at the entire picture of it. But over the last few years as a independent contractor, and I guess also throughout your whole career, I mean, what have you learned from your journey? And what's, I guess, the biggest takeaway that you could provide?
That's a great question. And I mentioned earlier that I like to learn and grow. I would say that the world as we know, so these last 4.5, 5 years have felt like much longer than the 5 years before them, right? Because everything has been turned on its ear. Look at everything that Britain's gone through in the last 4.5, 5 years. I mean, a lot has changed. And if we think about in the US, politics, whatever's changed, the economy's changed, all the variables are changing. So you cannot be status quo and think that you're staying even because you're really losing ground because everything else is changing. You may be an accountant and think that you're doing right, but your technology is changing. So you must learn how to keep up. Like I think that there must be this thirst for growth, thirst for knowledge, and how do I do better? Because otherwise you'll be passed by those that do have that thirst. Because there's nothing static in this world. I mean, everything in this world is dynamic now. I mean, our cars are dynamic. Everything is dynamic. And so we must be thinking, where's this going? Even if you think of AI, and how do I stay ahead? How do I get ahead? How do I learn? How do I understand more? All that sort of thing. And so my brain is all about how do I do that and how do I help others do that?
So definitely agree. One of the big things that I try to promote is those who have achieved online and posted it online with the LinkedIn certifications and the other certifications that there are. I mean, it's very clear that you practice what you preach, because I guess over the last 2016, 2017 with YouTube, you can probably see the progression of your knowledge and the way that you're constantly trying to push. And as you mentioned already, AI is something you're trying to include in your thoughts and how you approach things. So yeah, definitely go another plug. Continue professional development, but definitely as far as Jeffrey's YouTube, check it out. Check out his podcast. Yeah, check it all out. And your
Thank you.
books, which is not something we talk about. To be fair, one of the things I was looking at, so I noticed you have mentioned to me before in the past you are an author, but I didn't quite realize the amount of books that you've written. I thought it was one or two, but looking on Amazon, if people want to check it out.
And they're on all different topics. And in fact, just the week that we're recording this, so like current, I had a book out there that on asset management called Technology Asset Management. And I redid that book just from our conversation a few minutes ago on how do I make this an enterprise wide view of asset management? Like, because practice what I preach, right? Like we have to take that enterprise view. And so the books on Amazon are just a way to share my knowledge. And I started writing those in 2017. You'd laugh at the YouTube, you can see my hair thinning over the years because, it's been 7 years. You know, to your point, see, I ought to be a little more mature because I've learned a lot over those years and try to pass on better knowledge now than I did when I first started.
IT constantly evolving, and especially now, as we touched on a few times with AI, people adopting it, people not adopting it. I'll put a link in the podcast for sure. So what can we expect from Jeffrey Tefertiller and service management leadership?
That's a great question. So I'm doing my consulting thing and I'm enjoying it. And in the near future, I'm starting a training organization, using IP, intellectual property that I've developed to do things. And I won't get into the areas, but most of the certifications I see are very theoretical. They're not practical. And hopefully you can tell from my examples, I'm a very practical person. And so that's one thing on the horizon. And the other thing about me is that if I ever have dead time in my consulting, I usually write something. And so I have a couple books that are half written, but it's growth. It's how do I help others on their journey? How do I help? I mentor some people, and you and I, Sean, know a couple people that we're trying to help. But like this world is made by others helping others. Like I drank from wells that I did not dig. Had helped people help me in my career. I need to do the same for others. And the last few years, I hosted the global ITAM summit. We'll see if that happens this year. A lot of people that we both like around the world, like Rory and David Foxon and Pierce McDonald, and all these great people, Alexander Golev and Craig Garenti, all these great people have been on there and shared their expertise, and I've appreciated just learning, and I think that's where our society really needs to go as an industry is how do we grow? How do we appreciate the expertise that each one brings? And then how do I learn from them?
I for one, will be quite keen and to explore the training and see what comes through. It's I say anyone who flicks through the YouTube and obviously listens to you and sees you online, yeah, your content's great, and I'm sure someone sitting into your training will have a good time as well as obviously developing themselves. So no, absolutely fantastic. Being the Off Menu podcast, being aligned with myself, trying to provide takeaways for the industry to find other people's knowledge and benefit from is about learning and growth. And I know you mentioned that in the previous answer, but I mean, it's true, isn't it? I mean, that is a takeaway that, I mean, I wish I did more of it. I wish I do more of it. It's something we all need to do, but it's just, taking the advice and listening and heeding it, I guess, isn't it?
Well, let me say it this way. People that are in service management or asset management did not go to school, did not go to university. All of us fell backwards into this. What I mean? And, so there has to be some kind of growth. There has to be some kind of acknowledgement that I didn't really formally train to do this. And so that means no one else did as well. And so we must be thinking of how do we keep pushing that forward? Because whether we're talking tools or processes or whatever, status quo or being static and not dynamic will always push you further behind. It's not like an accounting degree here in the US and also in Europe where you go get your degree, you pass the exam, and now you're an accountant. There's none of that in my career. And so since there isn't a standard like that, there's no way really to judge people. There's no because whatever the standard is, here's our human nature. We want to get our big toe across the line and do no more. I mean, that's what we do, right? But we need to push it a little bit further. And since there is no standard, how do we do great work? How do we do outstanding work? How do we do work where people are like, man, I want to work with that person again? And that's what I'm striving to do.
Well, I'm certainly everyone who's listening to this will appreciate all of the takeaways, the knowledge that you shared, and of course, excited to see what's around the corner with you. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on. But before we obviously leave, what's your favorite takeaway when you're a little bit too busy to cook?
That's a great question. So there's two things about me that people don't know. I was old when I got married. I was 33. So I was a single guy for a long time. And so cooking in the house and all that just doesn't do for me like it does for my wife who grew up in that kind of stuff, right? And so I eat out. I eat a lot of barbecue, a lot of protein kind of stuff. Now that I'm older, I eat salads and vegetables too, because doctor makes us. And yeah, we got to balance it. And I work out, and so I'm okay, right? And so I enjoy the steak, the barbecue, the roasted, stuff. And and I live in the southern part of the U.S., so I enjoy iced tea, not hot tea, not coffee, more of iced tea. And so that's where I get my caffeine. And you can tell no caffeine in this call, but you can imagine I'm always fired up, especially with that in my veins.
Well, definitely, I watch a lot of Southern barbecue shows, so hey man, I'm jealous. But brilliant. Well, you've been a great guest. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Really, really appreciate that. And I'm sure all the listeners, as mentioned, will have appreciated everything. So thank you. Cheers.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, we've reached the end, and I hope you enjoyed that. If you want any further information about our guests, then their LinkedIn profile and contact information can be found in the episode notes. I do have one more section, which is a request for your involvement. I created this following multiple members of our community suggesting I should, and this is a community-driven platform that is created to help you. So if you know of any alternative solutions within our industry or related to the ITAM industry, I want to hear from you. Help me to interview those that you want to learn about. So please comment or reach out directly with your ideas. Let me help you to discover what is best for your environment. Finally, any feedback is welcomed. I really want to improve this podcast. The better this gets, the better the information you'll receive. So please help me to ask the questions that are relevant to you so you get the answers. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But please also share with your colleagues and industry peers if you feel it's relevant.